What does it mean when someone you've known for decades simply vanishes into the mist, and only the mountains hold the answer? That's exactly what happened to Ann Houghton, a 73-year-old volunteer whose devotion to the Smoky Mountains ran deeper than the trails she trod. She had been planning a familiar route, one she had walked countless times before. But when the day turned to night, and then to days, there was no sign of her. Ann Houghton had spent over 2 decades as a volunteer at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Since about 2004, she devoted more than 4,000 hours to the park, helping maintain trails, guiding visitors, tending native plant gardens, serving as a Leave No Trace ambassador, and quietly sharing her love for the wild with hundreds of strangers and regulars alike. She lived in Jackson County, North Carolina, near the foothills of the Smokies. In 2022, the park nominated her for the esteemed George and Helen Hartzog Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service. That nomination was a quiet signal of how deeply she was woven into the lifeblood of that place. In late January 2025, Ann left for what she intended to be a 2-day solo hike, Tuesday, January 28th into the 29th. It was not out of the ordinary. A hiker, yes, but also a guide, a helper, a familiar face to anyone who stopped in at the park's visitor centers. When she failed to return and missed her volunteer shift, concern turned into action. On Saturday, February 1st, authorities were alerted, and her vehicle was located in the Smokemont campground parking area. A search began immediately. Teams combed Bradley Fork, Chastine Creek, Hughes Ridge, the Enlow Creek Trail, Cherokee Fire and Rescue, Bussar, the Appalachian Mountain Rescue Team, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office joined the effort. Suspense grew with each passing hour. Ann had been known for her resilience and familiarity with these trails, yet here she was, out of contact. Searchers climbed ridges, scanned waters, called her name into the hush. The park had lost a beloved volunteer before, but never like this. Ann was not just any hiker. She had spent 2 decades guiding others. For many visitors, she was the gentle voice that welcomed them to the mountains. Steady footsteps they followed up gentle slopes. Now that voice was gone. Loved ones described her as someone who traveled to nearly every national park, even distant ones like American Samoa. Always alone, always exploring, always mapping out quiet trails on her own terms. Her sister's words carried the weight of the mountains. She died doing what she loved. A notion so very bittersweet it felt unreal. But how had someone with such experience and strength disappeared so completely? When her body was finally located on Sunday, February 2, just before 2 p.m., roughly a quarter mile off the Enlow Creek Trail, it was a moment of sorrow, not relief. The mountains had given up their secret, and yet for many, that answer felt cold. Official statements said no foul play was suspected. It was noted that no indication of criminal activity was found, but a sense of unease lingered. Why had the trail been unfamiliar territory to someone so accustomed? Why here? Investigators and park officials moved gently, guarding privacy and dignity, but also searching for understanding. Was it a misstep, a slip of time, a sudden medical event? In that silent quarter mile, the mystery remained. In a way, Ann's disappearance is a story about trust. A community entrusted her with their trails, their visitors, their silence. Volunteers like her are the quiet backbone of these public places, often invisible, deeply rooted, working without fanfare. And yet trust can obscure warning signs. When the familiar is suddenly gone, the world hollows out. That what happened here, that she, unafraid in the wild, might not return, felt unimaginable. As we consider the mountains, they are timeless, unhurried. They don't answer our questions. They simply endure. In the days after Ann's passing, tributes poured in. Fellow volunteers remembered her quiet strength. A colleague wrote, "I never hiked with Ann, but she worked right alongside people half her age all day." A reflection of her unassuming spirit. The park superintendent called her an enduring and beloved member of our Smokies community and extended condolences to her family and friends. Still, the questions remain. Was there something in that terrain that made a simple mistake irreversible? Did the boundaries between path and wilderness blur just enough? We may never know every detail. And perhaps that is the heart of the story. Not the answer, but the honest grief. Grief for a woman who served quietly but deeply. Grief for trails that carried her beyond reach. Grief for a community that lost one of its keepers. What lingers is not mystery alone, but reflection on how fragile our steps can be when we step alone, on how even the most familiar places can surprise us, on how dedication is not a guarantee, but a testament. Anne Houghton walked these mountains for 2 decades. She guided others, left them better informed, better connected, and in return, the mountains took her. In that exchange, there is no villain, only a deep human sorrow, but also a lasting presence. For me, the story ends not with closure, but with memory, a quiet invitation to walk a little more carefully, to listen a little more deeply, to honor those who give without expectation. Rest in the peace of mountain mist, Anne Houghton. Your footsteps remain. On July 28, 2025, park rangers at the Grand Canyon stumbled upon something chilling. A Tesla Cybertruck sat alone in the Grandview Point parking lot. Its owner, a 35-year-old man from Freehold, New Jersey, named Thomas Daniel Gibbs, was nowhere to be found. At first glance, it looked like any parked car on a summer day. But this wasn't an ordinary stop. The truck had been sitting there for days, and Thomas had vanished without a trace. 6 days earlier, July 22nd, 2025, around noon, Thomas had made his last known contact with family and friends. He was believed to be hiking along one of the most treacherous routes in the park, the Grandview Trail, heading toward Horseshoe Mesa. This is not a trail for casual visitors. It's steep, exposed, remote, and recommended only for highly experienced hikers. The path drops into a landscape both breathtaking and unforgiving, leading to a plateau marked by striking canyon views and the haunting remains of old copper mines. Thomas stood 6'1", with brown hair, brown eyes, and no tattoos. Alone, he stepped into this rugged wilderness, where July's record-breaking heat could turn even a short hike into a fight for survival. When he didn't return and days passed without an answer to calls or messages, friends and family grew alarmed. By July 28th, they officially reported him missing. That same day, search teams found his Tesla Cybertruck at the trailhead. It confirmed he had reached the starting point, but beyond that, nothing. No footprints, no camp, no discarded gear, just nothing. In a place this vast, that absence was terrifying. From July 29 to August 1st, the Grand Canyon became the center of an intense rescue effort. Ground teams combed the Grandview Trail and surrounding drainages. Search dogs, drones, and high-angle technical rescue crews were deployed. Every move was coordinated by park officials and Coconino County Search and Rescue. This wasn't a casual sweep. It was a full-scale operation against the clock. But as rescuers pushed deeper into the canyons, another disaster was already unfolding. The Dragon Bravo fire, sparked by lightning back on July 4th, had exploded into a monstrous megafire, burning over 123,000 acres. It destroyed at least 70 structures, including the North Rim's historic Grand Canyon Lodge, and forced its closure for the season. By July 31st, it had become the largest wildfire in the continental United States. Its heat was so intense, it created its own weather, towering pyrocumulus clouds billowing above the canyon. Officials insist the fire didn't stop the search, but it made everything harder. The terrain was already deadly. Now it was unpredictable. In recent days, with no new leads tying Thomas to the wider Grandview Trail area, the scale of the operation has been reduced. The search isn't over, but it has shifted into a holding pattern, ready to surge again if new evidence appears. Rangers continue to urge anyone who was in the Grandview Trail area on July 22nd to come forward if they saw Thomas or anything unusual. The Grand Canyon draws millions each year, nearly 5 million in 2024 alone. It is one of Earth's most breathtaking landscapes, but also one of the most unforgiving. Here, beauty and danger share the same horizon. For Thomas, July's heat, an unforgiving trail, and the chaos of a wildfire created a perfect storm of danger. As of August 7th, 2025, he is still missing. No evidence, but not forgotten. This is more than just a missing person case. It's a reminder of the thin line between adventure and tragedy, and the relentless dedication of those who search against all odds. One call could mean the difference. For Thomas, for his family, for all of us. On a warm August afternoon in 2008, in the quiet community of Happy Valley, Tennessee, 51-year-old Mike Hearon climbed onto his ATV and drove away from his home for what should have been a short ride. He was a lifelong local, deeply rooted in the hills and valleys that hugged the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Everyone knew Mike. He was friendly, dependable, the kind of man you'd wave to on the road because you knew he'd wave back. But that day, he didn't come home. When evening fell and his family realized the son had slipped away without any sign of him, concern began to grow. By nightfall, searchers were already combing the wooded trails behind his property, an area he knew better than almost anyone. And yet, there was nothing. It was as if Mike had ridden into the wilderness and simply vanished. No sound of an engine echoing through the hollows, no broken branches to mark his path, no hurried calls for help, just silence. From the very beginning, this wasn't a case of someone getting lost in unfamiliar terrain. Mike had spent his entire life here. The trails, the old fence lines, the hidden streams, they were part of his personal map, which made the early hours of the search especially unsettling. This was not a man prone to wandering off. Something had interrupted a perfectly ordinary day, and whatever it was, it left no trace the searchers could follow. It's moments like this, when a familiar life abruptly falls silent, that the questions begin to pile up faster than the answers. And in Mike's case, those questions have been building for over a decade. To understand why Mike's disappearance rattled the community so deeply, you have to know who he was. Born and raised in Blount County, he grew up surrounded by family, friends, and the steady rhythm of rural life. He worked hard, spending years in construction, and when he wasn't working, he was outdoors. Hunting, fishing, tending to the family's land, it was more than a hobby. It was a way of life. Mike was also a devoted father. His two sons remember him as patient, dependable, and quietly proud. The kind of man who showed love not so much in grand gestures, but in the daily ways he was there. Fixing things, teaching lessons, making time. His home sat on 100 acres bordering the national park. A beautiful, rugged piece of property that demanded respect. Dense woods rolled into steep ridges, and narrow trails wound through the trees. It was a place that could feel peaceful one moment and overwhelming the next, depending on the weather, the season, or what you might encounter. But for Mike, it was home. He was as comfortable on those trails as most people are in their own living room, which is why the search teams who arrived that first night were quietly confident, sure they'd find him quickly. They began on the ATV paths, fanning out toward the edges of the park. They called his name, scanned for tire tracks, looked for signs of a mechanical breakdown. But the deeper they went, the more they found themselves circling back with nothing to report. It was as if Mike had driven out into the woods and passed through an unseen door, leaving behind no footprint in the world he knew so well. By morning, the search had grown into a coordinated effort. Dozens of volunteers joined law enforcement and park rangers, forming grid patterns to sweep the property and surrounding areas. Helicopters traced the ridgelines. Dogs were brought in to catch any scent that might lead the way. The ATV was found abandoned along one of the wooded trails, not far from the edge of the park. It appeared to be in working order, which only deepened the mystery. Why would Mike leave it there? The dogs managed to track his scent for a short distance before it abruptly ended, as if the trail had been cut off. It was one of the first signs that this was not going to be a simple missing persons case. Neighbors stopped by to offer help. Friends walked the trails for hours, calling his name into the thick air of late summer. But every hour that passed without a lead felt heavier. When someone disappears in an area like this, there are usually only a few likely explanations. An accident, a sudden medical emergency, or becoming disoriented in the terrain. But none of those seemed to fit. Mike was healthy, cautious, and deeply familiar with every turn of those paths. The fact that his ATV was left behind felt deliberate or forced. And in that detail, people began to sense that something more troubling might have happened. What was most unsettling wasn't just that Mike was missing. It was that the wilderness seemed to be keeping a secret. And the longer it kept it, the colder the trail became. In the absence of answers, speculation began to grow. Some believed Mike had met with foul play. Others wondered if he had simply walked away from his life, though those who knew him best dismissed the idea outright. Theories branched out like the very trails searchers had walked, each one leading somewhere different, but none reaching a clear conclusion. One rumor suggested a dispute over land or money. Another hinted at a meeting that day, someone who might have been waiting for him in the woods. But none of these theories could be proven, and without evidence, they remained shadows. Law enforcement kept returning to the same hard facts. Mike left his home on his ATV. He was last seen riding toward the upper part of his property. The vehicle was found abandoned, and from that point onward, there was no trace of him. No clothing, no personal items, no remains. In 2009, almost a year after his disappearance, his family offered a reward for information, hoping money might loosen the silence that had settled over the case. But even that failed to bring new leads. Over time, the official investigation slowed, but for Mike's loved ones, the search never truly ended. His sons, in particular, held on to the belief that someone out there knew what had happened, that the truth was being carried quietly, perhaps by more than one person. And that possibility, that there were answers within reach, yet hidden, was perhaps the most difficult truth to live with. Time has a way of dulling certain memories, but it can also sharpen others. For the Hearon family, the passing years have only deepened the mystery. Search efforts were renewed periodically, with small teams venturing back into the area to recheck trails, follow up on tips, or search newly accessible terrain. Each attempt carried a fragile hope that a shift in the landscape or a fresh pair of eyes might uncover what had been missed before. But every search ended the same way, with more questions than answers. Mike's absence was felt not just by family, but by the wider community. He was the kind of neighbor who left an impression, quick to offer help, quick to share a laugh, and so his disappearance became a story people told not as idle gossip, but as a shared wound. The land where he vanished remains as it was, quiet, beautiful, and indifferent. The same ridges rise in the distance, the same shadows stretch across the trails in the late afternoon. And somewhere in that vast, unchanging space lies the truth about what happened on that summer day. For his sons, the hardest part is not knowing. They've built their adult lives without the certainty of where their father is or what happened to him. In some cases, the unknown can be accepted as part of life's unpredictability. But when the unknown comes in the form of a missing loved one, it doesn't fade. It lingers, a constant reminder that closure has yet to come. Today, more than 15 years later, the case of Mike Hearon remains officially unsolved. His disappearance has been covered in local news, revisited by investigators, and quietly discussed among neighbors. But the silence surrounding it has never truly broken. Some believe the wilderness swallowed the truth. Others are certain that someone knows more than they have ever said. Either way, the result is the same: a family left without answers, and a story that ends mid-sentence. When we think about missing persons cases, we often imagine dramatic rescues or sudden revelations. But the reality is that some mysteries remain exactly that, mysteries. And in those cases, the most haunting detail isn't the danger or the drama, it's the quiet. That trail where Mike's ATV was found still winds through the trees. The grass grows back over the tire ruts each spring. The forest stands as if nothing unusual ever happened there. And yet for those who loved him, that stretch of land will always feel different. It will always carry the weight of a moment that changed everything. Perhaps one day, someone will come forward. Perhaps the land itself will give up the truth. Until then, Mike Hearon's story is a reminder that even the most familiar places can hold secrets, and that sometimes the hardest journeys are the ones that never find their way home.